February 1st, 2026. Somewhere in the early hours of the morning, in a quiet suburb north of Tucson, Arizona, something happened inside a house that would shake an entire nation. The back door was propped open, the Ring camera had been yanked off the wall, and Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, barely mobile, dependent on daily heart medication, was gone. For 54 days, her daughter said almost nothing publicly. She stepped away from the cameras, away from the studio, away from the morning show desk she has occupied for over a decade. She went to Arizona, she stayed with her family, she pleaded on Instagram, she cried in videos that millions of people watched with their hands over their mouths. But she did not sit down and talk. Not like this. Until today. Today, on day 54 of the search for Nancy Guthrie, Savannah Guthrie sat down with her colleague and close friend Hoda Kotb on the Today Show, and for the first time since her mother vanished, she said everything. She talked about the phone call that shattered her world. She talked about walking into her mother's house and understanding in an instant that something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. She talked about the ransom notes. She talked about the footage of the masked man standing outside her mother's front door. She talked about her children, ages 11 and 9, trying to make sense of something that no child should ever have to make sense of. And she talked about the fear, the one fear that has been living inside her since day one, that her mother was taken because of her, because of who she is, because of her face on television every single morning. And then she said something that no one who watched it will forget. "I'm so sorry, Mommy. This is Forensic Disconnect, and this is day 54. Before we go any further into this, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We cover the Nancy Guthrie case every single day as it develops, and every day there is something new. Every day there is something that deserves attention. This case is 54 days old and it is nowhere near over. Subscribe so you don't miss a single update now. Let's go back to the beginning of today. Because to understand what made this interview so significant, you have to understand what has been building for nearly 2 months. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of NBC Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie. She is also the mother of Annie Guthrie and Camron Guthrie. She is a grandmother. She is a woman who spent decades in Tucson, Arizona, building a life rooted in community, in faith, in education, and in journalism. She worked at the University of Arizona. She once collected over 20,000 handwritten signatures to save the university's Poison Information Center from being shut down. She is not a statistic. She is not a headline.
She is a person, and she has been missing since the early hours of February 1st, 2026. That night, or more precisely, in the hours between late January 31st and the early morning of February 1st, Nancy was taken from her home in the Catalina foothills, a quiet, affluent neighborhood north of Tucson.
She had spent that Saturday evening at her daughter Annie's home nearby, joining the family for dinner and a game night. She arrived there around 5:32 in the afternoon. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her home later that evening. Her garage door opened at approximately 9:48 p.m. and closed 2 minutes later. That is the last confirmed moment of Nancy Guthrie's normal life. At 1:47 in the morning, doorbell camera footage captured something that would become one of the most chilling images in this case. A masked figure, armed, wearing gloves, carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, standing at Nancy's front door. The figure attempted to tamper with the camera. When that didn't work, he covered the lens with a leaf from a potted plant nearby. The camera disconnected at exactly 1:47 a.m. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker monitoring app disconnected from her phone. Investigators believe that is the moment she was taken. Her phone was still inside the house. Her wallet was still inside the house. Her car keys were still inside the house. Nancy Guthrie had not left voluntarily. She could not have. Authorities described her as a vulnerable adult, limited mobility, dependent on daily medication for her heart condition and blood pressure, living alone. She could not walk 50 yards by herself, in the words of Sheriff Chris Nanos. When her family could not reach her the following morning, when she failed to appear for her virtual church service, when the calls went unanswered, they went to the house. And what they found there is something that Savannah Guthrie described on live television for the first time today in detail that has not been public until now. The back door was propped open. The Ring camera had been yanked off the wall, and there was blood on the front step. That blood was later confirmed by forensic testing to belong to Nancy Guthrie. Around noon on February 1st, the family called 911. The Pima County Sheriff's Department responded. Within 24 hours, the investigation had shifted from a missing persons case to a criminal investigation. Within days, the FBI had joined. Bloodhound units, drones, aerial resources, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, all of it was mobilized. None of it found Nancy. Now, 54 days later, she is still missing. There has been no confirmed proof of life. There has been no arrest. There has been no named suspect. There has been no press conference from law enforcement in over a month. The investigation is active, according to authorities. A task force of 20 to 24 people remains dedicated to the case. Over 40,000 to 50,000 tips have come in. And still, nothing. Into that silence today, Savannah Guthrie spoke. The interview was recorded on Tuesday, March 24th. It aired in 2 parts. The first part today, Thursday, March 26th, and the second part will air tomorrow, Friday, March 27th, on The Today Show. Hoda Kotb, Savannah's longtime colleague, close friend, and the woman who has been sitting at the anchor desk in Savannah's absence, conducted the interview. And from the very first minutes, it was clear that this was not going to be a controlled, polished media appearance. Both women were in tears for much of it. Both women were visibly shaken. And what came out of it was something closer to a confession of pain than a press statement. Savannah began by talking about the moment she found out her mother was missing. She and her 2 children, Vale, who is 11, and Charlie, who is 9, had been spending time at the home of Today co-host Carson Daly and his family that weekend. Her husband, Mike Feldman, had just returned from a golf trip with friends, a Christmas gift she had given him. It was a normal Sunday. It was the kind of Sunday that feels ordinary until it suddenly, permanently isn't. Her sister Annie called. I said, "Is everything okay?" Savannah told Hoda. And she said, "No." She said, "Mom's missing." And I said, "What? What are you talking about?" She said, "She's gone." And she was in a panic. I was in a panic. In those first moments, Savannah said, the family's initial instinct was medical. Nancy had been living with significant back pain. She had limited mobility. Their first thought was that something had happened to her health, that she had fallen, that she had been taken to the hospital by paramedics, that there was a medical explanation for her absence. They began calling hospitals. They began reaching out to neighbors. And then they got to the house. And that is when everything changed. The back door was propped open. The Ring camera was gone from the wall. And there was blood on the front step. Savannah described the moment of understanding as hitting her like a physical force. She used the word disbelief. She described a kind of chaos, the noise of phones ringing, family members talking, her own mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. But her brother, Camron Guthrie, processed it immediately. Savannah described him as brilliant. She said he has a military background. She said that even on the phone, before he had seen anything, before anyone had confirmed anything, he already knew. He said, "I think she's been kidnapped for ransom," Savannah recalled. And I said, "What? Well, why? What?" She said it sounds like she was being naive in retrospect, but she just didn't want to believe it. She didn't want that to be the reality her family was living in. And then she said something that became one of the most painful moments of the entire interview. "Do you think it's because of me?" That is what she asked her brother, standing there in the chaos of that morning, with the blood on her mother's front step and the yanked camera on the floor. And he told her, gently but honestly, that yes, maybe, that is possible. Because here is what you need to understand about the fear that has been living inside Savannah Guthrie since day one of this case. She is one of the most recognized faces in American morning television. She has co-anchored The Today Show since 2012. She has interviewed presidents. She has covered some of the most significant news stories of the past decade. And her mother, Nancy, this quiet 84-year-old woman living alone in a house in the Arizona suburbs, is her mother. Which means that to anyone who wanted to get to Savannah Guthrie, to anyone who wanted money from the Guthrie family, to anyone with an obsession or a grievance or a plan, Nancy was the most accessible point of contact. Nancy was the vulnerability. Savannah talked about this directly and openly today in a way she has not before. She said she doesn't know for certain that it is because of her. She said the family doesn't know anything for certain. But she said the weight of that possibility, the idea that she brought this to her mother's door, that her fame and her public life and her face on television every morning made her 84-year-old mother a target, is almost unbearable to carry. "Which is too much to bear," she said, her voice breaking. "To think that I brought this to her bedside, that it's because of me." And then she said it. The words that stopped everyone watching. "I just say, I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry to my sister and my brother and my kids and my nephew and Tommy, my brother-in-law." She was sobbing when she said it. Hoda was crying. And anyone watching at home understood, in that moment, what 54 days of uncertainty looks like when it finally finds a voice. Now, what Savannah said today was not just emotional, it was also substantive. She revealed information about this case that has not been previously confirmed publicly. And some of it matters significantly for how we understand what happened on the night of January 31st into the early hours of February 1st. The back door being propped open is one of those details. Think about what that means. Nancy Guthrie's home is in a gated, affluent neighborhood. She was an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility who lived alone. If the back door was propped open when her family arrived, not broken, not forced, but propped open, deliberately left ajar, that suggests something specific about the nature of the crime. It suggests that whoever took Nancy either came in through the back or exited through the back or both, and either left the door open intentionally or was moving quickly enough that securing it was not a priority. It is a detail that raises more questions than it answers. But it is a detail that was not part of the public record until Savannah said it on television today. The Ring camera being yanked off the wall is also significant. We knew from the doorbell camera footage released by the FBI that the suspect attempted to tamper with the front door camera. What Savannah described today sounds like something additional, a camera that was physically removed from a wall inside or at the back of the property. The distinction matters. It suggests a level of awareness about surveillance systems that goes beyond simply covering a lens with a leaf. It suggests someone who understood where cameras were located and moved deliberately to disable them. And then there are the ransom notes. This is an area where Savannah was more specific today than she has ever been before. Multiple ransom notes have surfaced since Nancy's disappearance. Some were sent to media outlets, including CNN affiliate Cold in Tucson and TMZ. Some were apparently sent directly to the Guthrie family. The notes sent to media included demands for millions of dollars in Bitcoin, with deadlines, 2 of which passed without payment in the first week of the investigation. Authorities neither confirmed nor denied the validity of any of the notes at the time. Savannah addressed this directly today. She said she believes most of the ransom notes, the ones sent to media outlets, are not real. She believes they were fraudulent attempts to exploit the situation, possibly by people trying to insert themselves into the story or claim the reward. But she said she believes the notes sent directly to her family, the ones she and her siblings received and responded to via social media in the first week, those she tends to believe are real. I tend to believe those are real, she said. That matters. Because if the notes sent directly to the family are genuine, then whoever took Nancy was attempting to negotiate. They were seeking money. They wanted something, which aligns with the theory that this was a targeted kidnapping for ransom, which is what Savannah's brother Camron concluded within hours of the disappearance, and what Sheriff Chris Nanos has hinted at without confirming, saying the investigation is treating this as targeted and that they believe they know the motive, even if they won't say it publicly. Savannah also addressed the footage of the masked man directly. She described seeing it for the first time as absolutely terrifying. She said she cannot imagine that that is who was standing over her mother's bed in the middle of the night. That phrase, standing over her mother's bed, is striking. It implies that whoever entered the house approached Nancy while she was in her bedroom, possibly while she was asleep. It implies a level of invasion that goes beyond simply entering a property. This is consistent with investigators' belief that the abduction happened in the very early morning hours, around 2:28 a.m. when her pacemaker app disconnected, which would be well within the window when an 84-year-old woman would likely be in bed, asleep. She also talked about the footage in another context, the speculation, almost immediately after its release, that the masked figure might have been captured on the doorbell camera on more than one date. FBI Director Kash Patel released images on February 10th that he stated were from the morning of the disappearance. But 2 law enforcement sources subsequently told NBC News that at least one of those images appeared to have been captured on a different night, a detail that surprised local and federal investigators who had hoped to keep that information confidential. The Pima County Sheriff's Department pushed back on this, stating there was no date stamp associated with the images and that any suggestion they were from different dates was speculative. Savannah did not resolve this question today, but the interview touched on it as part of the broader picture of a case where authorities have sometimes appeared to be operating in different directions. Savannah also spoke about the family's internal dynamic through all of this, how the 3 siblings, Savannah, Annie, and Camron, have functioned as a unit. She said she has not posted a single thing, has not said a single word publicly, without the 3 of them deciding together what to say. Every Instagram post, every video, every public statement. All of it discussed and agreed on collectively. She described her sister Annie as having a special kind of intuition and faith and depth of heart. She described her brother as brilliant, with a clarity of thinking that cut through the chaos from the very first moment. And she described the three of them as having come together around the gifts their parents gave them, the gifts of strength and truth, and a certain kind of resilience that was forged early. Because Savannah's father, Charles Guthrie, died when she was 16 years old. He was 49. It was sudden. And Nancy, this same woman who is now missing, this same 84-year-old who was taken in the middle of the night in her pajamas with no shoes and no medication, Nancy is the one who raised those three children after their father died. She is the one who showed them how to survive something that felt unsurvivable. She is the one who modeled through her own life what it looks like to keep going when everything falls apart. Savannah referenced this today. She said her mother taught her to decide and do, a phrase apparently that Nancy used often, a philosophy of forward motion, of not being paralyzed by grief or uncertainty or fear, but of making a decision and moving through it. And Savannah said she has been trying to apply that philosophy to every single day of the past 54 days, even when she wakes up at 3 a.m, imagining her mother's terror, even when the weight of not knowing feels physically impossible to carry. She taught me to be strong, Savannah said, but she taught me to be true. So whether she's on this earth still or whether she's in heaven, I know where she is. I know who she's with, but we need to know. That sentence carries so much. Whether she's on this earth still. It is the first time Savannah has framed it quite that way in a live interview, acknowledging not just the possibility, but the weight of not knowing whether her mother is alive or dead, and somehow still maintaining a posture of faith and forward motion in the face of it. She also talked about her children today. Vale is 11. Charlie is 9. They are old enough to understand that something terrible has happened to their grandmother, old enough to ask questions, old enough to feel the absence. Savannah said she and her husband have tried to talk to them, tried to give them a little more certainty than the adults actually have, to let them grieve without being consumed by the full weight of the uncertainty that the adults are carrying. She said her kids would reach out to her while she was in Tucson, asking for updates, expressing hope, children looking for something to hold on to. And she talked about Nancy's house, the house in the Catalina foothills that has become both a crime scene and a memorial, with yellow flowers and handwritten notes stretching across the driveway left by strangers who felt compelled to show up. Savannah called the house hallowed ground. She said her mother loved that house. She said it was her safe haven. And she said it is really hard to see that violated, to think about what her mother must have felt when whoever came through that back door came through it. Now, there is something important to understand about the context in which this interview happened, and about why it happened now, on day 54, rather than earlier in the investigation. The search for Nancy Guthrie has been going on for nearly 2 months. In that time, the case has dominated national news, generated tens of thousands of tips, prompted a $1 million reward from the family and a $100,000 reward from the FBI, and drawn the involvement of the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and multiple forensic specialists. It has also generated an extraordinary amount of online speculation, some of it valuable, some of it harmful. One of the more painful aspects of this case, which Savannah addressed today, is the cruel speculation, as she put it, that someone in her family may have been involved in Nancy's disappearance. This is something that happens in virtually every high-profile missing persons case. The family becomes suspects in the court of public opinion, often before any evidence points in that direction, often simply because they are the people closest to the victim. Savannah spoke about this today with a kind of tired, weary honesty. She described it as pain upon pain. She said the family has been cleared. Authorities have stated publicly that the family are victims, not suspects. But the online whisper campaign existed nonetheless, and she felt it. She also talked about something that has been a quiet undercurrent in the coverage of this case from very early on, the question of the family's wealth. Nancy's house is in an affluent neighborhood. Savannah is a prominent television anchor who, by any measure, is a wealthy woman. The ransom demands, reportedly in the millions of dollars in Bitcoin, suggest that whoever took Nancy believed the family had the means to pay. Savannah addressed this directly today, not defensively, but honestly. She said that it would make sense, if someone wanted to target her family for money, that they might look at her and think, that lady has money, we can make a quick buck. She said she doesn't know if that's the reason. She said the family doesn't know anything for certain. But she said the possibility that her professional success, her public profile, her visibility made her mother a target is something she carries with her every single day. Now, the investigation itself. Where does it stand as of today? Day 54? The Pima County Sheriff's Department has a task force of 20 to 24 people still actively working the case. The FBI remains involved. The department has stated that the investigation will continue until Nancy is located or all leads have been exhausted. Over 40,000 to 50,000 tips have been received and processed. DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home is still being analyzed, with investigators exploring the possibility of forensic genetic genealogy, the same technique that helped identify Brian Kohberger in the University of Idaho murders in 2022. New surveillance footage was recovered from cameras around Nancy's property in recent weeks, cameras on the fence at the back of the house and covering the driveway and garage. Those images showed family members, landscapers, and pool workers in the weeks prior to the kidnapping. Nothing in those images was deemed suspicious. None of them showed the suspect captured on the front door camera. The gloves found approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home, which briefly seemed like a potential breakthrough, were traced via DNA to a local restaurant worker who was not part of the investigation. That lead went cold. The FBI has also been looking at a vacant property near Nancy's home and several houses under construction in the area in the weeks before the disappearance. Agents requested the names of contractors and workers active in the neighborhood. No public update has been given on what, if anything, was found. Sheriff Chris Nanos has said he believes he knows the motive, but he won't say what it is publicly. He has said the attack was targeted. He has said the suspect could strike again. He has said he does not think Nancy wandered off. He has said the investigation is active and ongoing, and he has said almost nothing else to the media in over a month. Meanwhile, the Pima County Board of Supervisors has announced it will investigate Sheriff Nanos' own disciplinary record and work history, a development that raises questions about the leadership of the very agency at the center of this investigation. Nanos has faced public criticism for what many have described as mishandling of the case, including turning away experienced civilian search groups like EquiSearch and the United Cajun Navy, and for a series of contradictory public statements about the investigation's direction. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, who has been following the case closely, has pushed back on the idea that the investigation is stalling. She wrote on social media that the case is red hot behind the scenes, that investigators are, in her words, drinking from a fire hose with more leads than most cases ever generate. She suggested that the sheriff's decision to turn away civilian search groups may actually be a signal that authorities are closer to an arrest than the public realizes, that they may not want outside groups disturbing an active operation. That is a theory, not a confirmed fact, but it is a theory coming from someone with decades of experience inside the FBI, and it is worth noting. And then there is the theory from Rick Castigar, the man who was Sheriff Nanos' own boss, who spent 46 years in the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and who went on record this week with the most sobering assessment yet of what he believes happened to Nancy Guthrie. He believes she was taken to Mexico. He believes multiple people were involved in the abduction. He believes they intended to keep her alive long enough to collect a ransom. And he believes she has since died. My theory is that she's passed, he said. My theory is that they have nothing. The perpetrators really have nothing with which to bargain any further. Castigar is not a random voice. He is not an internet commentator. He is a 46-year veteran of the very department leading this investigation. His former subordinate is the sheriff, and he is saying publicly that he believes Nancy is gone. Retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb, in separate comments this week, said the abduction was premeditated and likely involved 2 to 4 people. He said the home was surveilled prior to the crime. He said this was not opportunistic. It was planned. And another former FBI agent, in an interview published earlier this month, raised the possibility that the motive was rooted in obsession or resentment directed at Savannah herself, that someone targeted Nancy, not because she was a wealthy elderly woman living alone, but because she was Savannah Guthrie's mother, and that was the point. That theory today took on a new weight, because Savannah sat on live television and asked the same question out loud. Because of me? Is this because of me? She doesn't know. The investigation hasn't confirmed it, but the fear is real. And the fact that Savannah is sitting with that fear, carrying it publicly, saying it on television, that tells you something about where this family is after 54 days of not knowing. There is one more thing from today's interview that deserves attention, and it is something small, but it matters. Savannah said she still refers to her mother in the present tense. She gushed about how incredible her mother is. She talked about what Nancy would think about all the support she has received, that she would be amazed by it. She talked about the house in Arizona as hallowed ground, as a place her mother loves and treasures. Present tense. Not loved, not treasured. Loves, treasures, is. That is not an accident. That is a choice. And it tells you everything about where Savannah Guthrie is standing after 54 days, not in certainty, not in acceptance, but in refusal. She is refusing to speak of her mother in the past tense. She is refusing to let the language of grief become the language of her reality. She is holding the door open in the only way she has left, for the possibility that Nancy is still out there. Whether she's on this earth still, or whether she's in heaven, I know where she is, she said. I know who she's with, but we need to know. Day 54. No arrest, no suspect, no confirmed proof of life, and a daughter, sitting on national television, still holding on. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, anything at all, no matter how small, no matter how insignificant it might seem, please contact the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. You can also submit tips online at tips.fbi.gov. The Guthrie family is offering a reward of up to $1 million. The FBI is offering an additional $100,000. Tips can be anonymous. The reward can be paid in cash. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is 5 feet tall. She has silver hair and blue eyes. She was last seen wearing pajamas and had no shoes. She requires daily medication for her heart. She is somebody's mother. She is somebody's grandmother. She deserves to be found. If this video added anything to your understanding of this case, please hit the like button. It helps this channel reach people who might have information that matters. Subscribe if you haven't already. We are here every day for as long as this case is open, because Nancy Guthrie deserves to have people paying attention. We will see you tomorrow for Day 55.